The idea of neutrality has long since been the holy grail of audio. Just imagine, perfectly balanced sound, the bass, the mids, the treble, everything existing on the same plane with not a single instrument being pushed forward nor recessed. Arguably the very first universal in-ear monitor, the Etymotic ER4, was purpose-built to be as flat as you can get it using diffuse field theory, and this was all the way back in 1991. With more than 30 years of audio science and research having passed since then, it's time for a new paradigm. This is pure water, room temperature, true level. This is the reference. This is a quick summary of this entire video. Today I am launching the new CrinEar Reference, an IEM with an all-aluminum 5-axis CNC shell with a contoured pseudo-custom shape. The CrinEar Reference sports a 5-driver hybrid configuration, 2 dynamic drivers in a horizontally opposed dual woofer system, or Kodawus for short, alongside 2 Sony balanced armatures for the mid-range, as well as a single Knowles super tweeter. The Reference is tuned to be the world's flattest IEMs, more on that later, and of course embodies the CrinEar philosophy to provide you with the best performance at its price point, $349. The CrinEar Reference is now available at Hangout.audio, my very own online retail store with free global shipping, and is also available and in stock at Amazon and AliExpress. Some of you may also consider our esteemed regional retailers such as Headphones.com and Bloom Audio in the US, Elise Audio in the UK, Audiophonics in France/EU, Hi-Fi Passion in Germany/EU, Headphone Zone in India, Soundproof Bros in Thailand, Bass Audio in Indonesia, Zeppelin & Co in Singapore, and The Audio People in Vietnam, and many more to come when more retailers are interested in carrying our stuff. For those of you who are interested in buying a reference right now, links are all down in the description. But for the rest of you, you would know that there's still so much I would like to talk about. So if you would indulge me, let me get right into the nerd shit. First, let's start off with the gigantic elephant in the room, the bold claims that I'm spouting all over this video and all over your feed at this point, the tuning. First, let's talk about flat, because this is a word that has been thrown around so much in the industry, and you would think that it's a word that represents some level of an objective definition. But you look into the market and you realize that everyone has a model that tries to be flat. So does that mean that there is 10 different versions of flat, that flat can just mean everything? The word flat is in its most accurate definition in the context of speakers. You have a speaker, you measure it with an omnidirectional microphone that is of course ideally flat on its own, and if it comes out to be a flat line, then that speaker is flat. But even within the speaker world, there's a lot of things that would affect how a speaker would respond. For example, the room that it's in, how far it is away from you, for example, which is why there's also a split between how one would measure a speaker. First of which would be in an anechoic environment, aka in kind of a soundproof room. Second would be on a near field response, which means the speaker is very close to you. And finally, a far field response. As the name implies, it is further from you and kind of in a living room situation, if you will. So for the longest time, how we measured flat for an IEM or a headphone would be to use a head and torso simulator, or HAT, put that into the environment that you're trying to measure a speaker in, anechoic, near field, or far field, and whatever response that the microphones in the HATs picks up is your flat. Hit that curve and in theory you have flat for your IEMs or your headphones. That is how Etymotic in the 90s did it. They have Etymotic diffuse field for a reason, and that is how they created their ER4. Again, legendary IEMs, absolutely great earphones, but a bit dated. Those of you who are familiar with my content would know that I made a lot of references to this, the Type 5128 by Brew & Care. This is the hats. This is the new equipment that is on the bleeding edge of audio science, and it's the one that we'll be using to redefine flat for IEMs. There's a lot of additional context that I kind of don't want to put in this video. Links are down below for an article that I wrote about IEF Preference 2025, which kind of defines how we got here in the first place. But to make an extremely long story short, we have a flat line for this hat, or flat curve if you will, and then we tilt it down so as to emulate good speakers in a well-treated room. Most of you watching at this point would be familiar with the JM1 curve, the population average diffuse field, and then we tilted it down by 1 dB per octave to create what I would consider perceptually flat. Now make no mistake, we can hit this curve even more than we have right now, but after listening to it for a while, we have made some additional adjustments that make it sound even more flat, perceptually flat, if you will, and I'll explain it right now. First of all, the bass adjustment. You realize that the reference is actually about 2 decibels above the line at this point, and that is actually extremely intentional. Throughout all the times that I've been in the hobby, a lot of people complain that what seemingly looks flat on an IEM graph or headphone graph doesn't feel as flat as you would with a proper pair of speakers. Some people theorize that because anechoic chamber measurements only use 1 speaker, the moment you use 2, like in real life, you actually get more of a bass response, and that's why you hear more. Some others would also theorize that there is a certain physicality that you hear with actual proper speakers, for example, the bass actually thumping in your chest. And I personally also experience the same things. When I hear proper good speakers, I feel like there's actually a fair amount of bass, actually quite a lot of bass. But that doesn't really translate when you use the same target curve on an IEM or a headphone. And so with the reference, we adjusted the crossover between the bass driver and the mid drivers to bump up the bass just a little bit, enough to feel that there is actually bass, but not enough to feel like it's fun. It sounds like an insult, but let's face it, fun is not neutral. Fun is decidedly emphasized. The mid-range tuning was fairly easy to hit. Once we selected our Sony drivers and then did our R&D on how to tune it, we managed to hit our target response fairly easily. But really the biggest issue of tuning the reference would be on its treble response. And this is not an issue that's exclusive to the reference, but rather an issue that's exclusive to IEMs, and even to a further extent, to headphones. Because you see, obviously, everyone has different ears, and to some level of extent we hear differently, but we hear the most differently in the high frequencies. A lot of things can affect this: the shape of your ears, the length of your ear canal, the shape of your ear canal, and all of this results in, quite frankly, massive inconsistencies when it comes to generating a flat target curve. So what we have to do, and what basically everyone who wants to build an IEM has to do, is to simply approximate what a flat treble should sound like. This is the flat treble that we came up with, but we can also acknowledge that a lot of people probably wouldn't hear the reference as flat because of anatomical differences. But just because it's tough doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So at the end of the day, the reference still tries to hit a certain level of flatness in the treble, or at least flat in terms of JM1/ the ISO, I don't know what the numbers are. Some of you right now would probably ask, why are you adding a tilt? Why don't you just use the true raw diffuse field response? The simple answer is that that's not flat. Diffuse field is measured in an anechoic chamber. What that means is there's no reflections, there's sound absorption everywhere, and acoustically, it's a dead room. So a speaker could measure absolutely flat in that environment, and if it measures flat in that, truly it is flat. But the moment you take that out and put it in a regular living room, regular room in general, you get this, a down tilt. So what we're trying to do with the reference is to emulate this kind of flat, to take truly flat speakers and put them in kind of a studio environment. That is a lot of words to say that we have tried and arguably succeeded in creating the world's flattest IEMs. And one of our goals with the CrinEar reference is to hopefully make it a true reference point for the entire IEM market. But more importantly, internally, the CrinEar reference is, well, a reference point for flat within the CrinEar ecosystem. So when we say something is boosted, recessed, or even flat for our future models, you will know that it is within the context of the CrinEar reference as a reference. And yes, I've made so many bold claims, I know. So let me just run through the data with you. Here is Squig Rank by PEQ Hub. They scrape the entire internet of all the measurements kind of in the world, and they allow you to cross-reference a target or even a model and see what IEMs hit that target the closest. So in terms of using this database, or more accurately, every database in the world, the CrinEar reference is indeed the world's flattest IEMs in terms of adherence to JM1 with a -1 dB tilt. And that is not just with the 5128, no, we've achieved parity both in the 5128 as well as with the 711. The CrinEar reference is the flattest IEM regardless of what equipment you use to measure it on. So I've talked about how this is the reference, the flattest and whatnot, but now it's at the point where I actually try to convince you not to buy a CrinEar reference. The CrinEar reference is purpose-built to be a precision instrument. Again, our goal is to be the flattest. We have hit it, but at the same time, a lot of people need to understand what flat sound really is. As I have briefly mentioned previously, a flat tuning means that nothing is emphasized. And that also means that nothing is subjectively fun. The CrinEar reference, as well as many IEMs similar to it, presents the mix as it is, completely level, but that also means that it could potentially sound bland to many people. So I need to remind people that there's a reason why we call the CrinEar reference the reference and why we keep harking on and on about how it's completely flat. It is flat. You don't buy a bottle of water and then complain that it's not sweet. And in a similar vein, you don't buy the reference and then complain that it doesn't have enough bass or enough treble. This is an IEM that is precise and accurate and should be treated as such. Now let's talk about the slightly smaller elephant in the room, and that is, why is the CrinEar reference so expensive? I get it, the reference is more than double the price of the Daybreak, which is our previous model, coming in at $169 US. From the very beginning, the whole point of the reference was to create a more premium IEM, and we had to do it in multiple ways. First of all, would be, of course, in the build. We use a 5-axis CNC process to create the aluminum shell. As you can see, it's extremely well contoured and is fairly small for the driver configuration that we have selected. We use the, again, horizontally opposed dual woofer system, which is two 10mm dynamic drivers smashed together and shoved into the shell. It is a chunky boy because on top of the fact that it's two 10mm drivers, we also have a metal chamber to house both of them. The woofers take up most of the space, but what takes up most of the cost would actually be the Sony balanced armature drivers that we have selected. Everybody loves branded drivers. We kind of tolerate them, but more importantly, Sony has the very specific model of BEAs that create the absolutely perfect mid-range response that we're looking for. We also use a Niles tweeter to handle 10,000 Hz and above, and what you can see is that it results in a very smooth and well-extended response up top. Relative to the Daybreak, you also realize that we have improved the cable massively, and instead of the old leatherette hard case, we have now switched it to a new leatherette zip case, and one that I affectionately refer to as the taco. Now, some of you may also remember that we have teased the reference like a year ago, back in CanJam New York 2025. So why all of the delays? Well, some of you may remember our original resin prototype, and this was the prototype that hit all of our acoustic requirements nearly perfectly. And the fact of the matter is, we basically took one entire year trying to recreate this lightning in a bottle and basically failing every single time. Every subsequent prototype was either A, too big in terms of shell size, or B, simply tuned completely differently, which is why you see over the course of the year, we brought the same resin prototype every single time. Secondly would be that translation from the resin shell to a full metal shell is actually more of a hellish experience than I thought. With the subsequent prototypes, when we tried to fit all of the drivers into a new metal shell, we had to expand it, make it bigger, and bigger to the point where even I felt like it was unergonomic. So a lot of time was spent to shrink the shell to its original dimensions of the resin prototype, which proved to be far more difficult. I don't think we've actually succeeded in that. We had to extend the size just a little bit, but I think I'm very happy with the compromise that we've made. And of course, when it comes to the costing, you know that in terms of 2025, a lot of things have happened. Costs just kept going up throughout the year, and for some whatever reason, Sony decided also to raise their prices. So we were struggling to try and keep costs down. I wanted to make it at under $300, but clearly we struggled at that. But at the end of the day, I think we've controlled costs fairly well. $349 in today's economy, at least, is pretty much a miracle at this point. So for those of you who have followed our journey as a manufacturer, as CrinEar, would know that we have made some slight missteps, but of course we have also learned a lot along the way. So a lot of the previous issues that we had with the Daybreak are, first of all, solved by the fact that we're using a metal shell. And second, since we've already experienced such problems on the Daybreak, we know exactly where to focus on. So hopefully no more repeated mistakes. This is one take. We're gonna test out the durability of the CrinEar Reference. As you can see, this is the stocks that have arrived for Singapore. So I'll be taking a random unit, completely sealed. You can see factory shrink wrapped. Fresh. We'll test it as with any common dropping scenario. For example, taking it out of your pocket. Oh, by the way, this is concrete. Now, common dropping scenarios. Oops, dropped it out of my pocket. Perfectly fine. Obviously, it's perfectly fine. Less common scenario. Oops. Same deal. You know what? Fuck it. Still fine. Now, by the way, if you happen to drop it or yeet it into the ground, the BAs are probably going to break first. So just a word of warning, just because the shell survives doesn't mean the IEM survives. And so this is the CrinEar Reference, the world's flattest IEMs, now available at $349. We thank you all for the massive support that you have given us for the Project Meta, as well as the Daybreak, and hope that you can extend that support for the Reference as well. Grab the Reference at Hangout.audio, Amazon, AliExpress, or even support your local dealers. Thank you for sticking by us, and don't die. Fuck off.